allesammans! Today we are speaking about a little place called Avaldsnes, as it's sometimes referred to as Norway's oldest and first capital. It's a very impressive tourist destination today, but that pales in comparison to the rich history and the size and significance of what it was in ancient times. Going back to the Viking Age, this was a place where many of the most powerful Norwegian kings ruled from. Harald Fairhair to be the first one to make it the main royal seat of Norway. However, this was a place of rule and significance going back long before the Viking Age, back before the migration period, the Bronze Age, and even back before the Stone Age. So there really is no other place in Norway with as significant and as long as a history of this place, so grab your drinking horns and sit back while we go over the amazing history of Avaldsnes. So, when I say the history of this place goes back to before the Stone Age, I mean it. Look at this map. Going back to the Ice Age when most of northern Europe was under ice, but in the following thousands of years as the glaciers slowly melted, look at what is uncovered. The first part of Norway to be habitable was this area right here, so that's where we see some of the earliest settlements taking place. Fast forward some thousands of years into the Bronze Age, and it was always at the time then too a place with significant settlements we find in the archaeology. But we really start to see a big growth in the Bronze Age, my favorite period in history. The site contains the only Norwegian example of Bronze Age burial mounds kind of lined up in a row. So very impressive there. A lot of other rich Bronze Age finds come from right around this area, and that I'll cover in the end of the video with some images from the museum. But for now, we can move on to the next period. We're talking about the Iron Age leading into the migration period. So this is where we start to have actually some written records of what happened in this area and who lived there. It's not super clear because a lot of these sources come from Roman authors who had never actually been there. It's just second-hand accounts from Tacitus or Pliny the Elder. Either way, we are pretty sure that this area was inhabited by a tribe called the Yugi, as they were referred to, and they were known to be fierce fighters and very loyal to their chieftains and kings. Of course, there were many more tribes in the area and in Norway. We just don't have many written records of them because they were a bit more remote and mysterious and unknown than the Germanic tribes bordering the Roman territories, for example. But going a few hundred years later, into the migration period in about the 500s AD, this is when we start to see detailed records of who lived there. This is the main point of the history and actually where Avaldsnes got its name. It was from King Augvald, or as the Norse would have called him, probably something like Augvaldir. There are Norse sagas coming from hundreds of years after these events happened, so they might not be super reliable, but if we do assume that these are accurate or based on some reality, sometime in the late 500s-ish, which would be prime migration period time, that's also around the time Beowulf lived, by the way, that is when a great king came along named Augvald, who established his rule here and gave his name to this place. That's why it was called Avaldsnes, meaning Augvald's headland or cape, just like it is a cape here. As a member of the West Nordic royal families, Augvald is attested as even being able to trace his ancestry back to the ancient giant Fornjot, which is probably another name for Ymir from Norse mythology. Make whatever of that you like. Like I said, these stories might not be the most reliable, but just for some little background there. However, what we do know from these stories and archaeological evidence and the DNA evidence, it seems that Augvald's wife came from Mongolia, or at least had very strong Mongolian ancestry. There's a whole spot in this museum that is dedicated to her. Augvald was actually a very religious man too. He owned and worshipped a sacred cow, which he always kept with him, and he believed that he owed his victories in battle to the cow and the power of its milk. This is very similar to accounts of some other Germanic tribes living centuries before, how they kept kind of sacred animals as part of their religious rituals. Augvald won many great battles, but he was eventually killed during a battle against his rival. But his sons and grandsons and descendants, many generations down the line, ruled powerfully in this location. His son Jussur became king of Rogaland, and he reconquered parts of Hordaland. He was then succeeded by his son named Jör. Jör's son, Jörleif the Womanizer, his nickname was a king of Hordaland and Rogaland, and he mounted expeditions to Bjarmeland and Denmark, as all attested. Also notable, a series of ship burials from around this time, the late 600s, early 700s found here. This is the oldest ship burial uncovered within the Nordic countries actually, and they were all kind of lined up in a row like nothing else from the time, so we think that these were lined up possibly signifying correlated royal burials of kings and chieftains from the area. Like I mentioned at the start, clearly a place of great rule going back thousands of years, mainly due to its strategic location. It didn't stop there though, it became an even stronger place to rule as we get into the Viking Age, starting with Harald Fairhair. Harald Fairhair became the first official king of Norway, and out of all the places he could rule from, he chose his main seat, ruling all of Norway, to be located right here at Avaldsnes. That's why it's often referred to as Norway's first capital, and this would have been the most extravagant, rich center of the age, and like I mentioned before, it was because of its strategic location, right along a narrow strait where basically trading ships had to pass through to get to trade with other parts of Norway. So very powerful, and they would have got a little piece of that action throughout all of history pretty much. Not just Harald Fairhair, but his son, named Håkon the Good, also ruled from there a little bit at his kingdom. King Håkon fought a fierce battle at Blodheia here against the sons of his half-brother Erik Bloodaxe. Another one of Harald's descendants was also a king, Olav Trygvason, who actually also partly ruled from here at certain points during his reign. Olav Trygvason built a manor and Norway's first legitimate church. And in one famous story, King Olav came across a number of wizards who visited the area, and Olav, who hated pagans and especially ones who engaged in magic, he chained them up to a small reef island when the tide was low, and when the tide came up, it made it so the wizards drowned to death. And right here is that exact island that you see there right in the screen where you're looking at now. Post-Viking Age, the importance didn't fade away then either. Construction in the present-day church located here, it's called St. Olav's Church of Avaldsnes. It was started approximately 1250 AD, quite a bit after the Viking Age, but it was one of the greatest Norwegian stone churches from the Middle Ages, and it was a very important station on the Pilgrim's route to Nidaros, which ran along the coast of Norway all the way up to Trondheim. And this is still walked today by Christians from around Scandinavia as kind of like a pilgrimage. So considering how important of an area this was, there is relatively little there today, but there are two major things that you must see if you're in the area. There's the Norwegian History Center, which was a museum, opened in 2005. It goes underground, and it goes over all the history of this area dating back to the Viking Age. And there's even a little movie that plays down there with Harald Fairhair himself narrating it and guiding you through the history of this place.
Arma hadde jeg denne ringen. Med den vil jeg vise deg hvordan Gud være.
There is also a replica of a Viking Age farm village with several buildings, reproductions of a longhouse and boathouses on the island of Bukkøy, just a few minutes away. In the summertime, there's a ton of activities and events there, but this video, when I was visiting, it was a little bit too early. I went to Norway in May this year, but if you visit in the summer months, it really is a spectacle here. It feels like a festival with tons of activities and Viking things to do. So that's all for today. We're finishing up this video by taking you through some spots in the museum, going over some of the most ancient history of this place and archaeological finds. But hope you enjoyed. Again, if you're in the southwest of Norway, it really is a must visit. And really, it is an important part of Scandinavian history that everyone should know about, as it was officially referred to as Norway's first capital city, even though there is not much there today and most people might just drive past it without knowing what went on there. So, hope you enjoyed this video for now. That's all for today. Vi ses nästa gång.